Hello and welcome to the PowerTest 25 conference hosted by NETA. I'm Ellen Parson, Editor-in-Chief of EC&M, and I'm here today in Orlando to learn everything I can about electrical power safety and reliability from some of the leading subject matter experts in the field. Today I have with me Alex Chausovsky. He is the Director of Analytics and Consulting at the Bundy Group.
Yes.
And you said that's headquartered in Charlotte, but you
North
are
Carolina.
in Vermont?
I am in New Hampshire.
You're in New Hampshire,
Yes.
okay.
About an hour north of Boston.
Okay, and he gave a phenomenal keynote address this morning to the PowerTest attendees, talking about basically the economic forecast in general as a whole, then drilled it down to how it was going to affect our specific electrical economy. So it was a fantastic presentation. I know everybody really enjoyed that. And so here what we're doing for the EC&M audience is we want to get kind of the key takeaways from that overview and then kind of drill it down so that it can make sense to them, something they can watch for in the future as they go through this kind of already a little bit chaotic and uncertain year, let's say.
Period,
okay,
right?
that's a good word. So let's start with, you kind of kicked it off with some general stats as far as tons of data. So as far as the overall economy goes, like where are we positioned right now? What do you think? How are we going to move through the first, second quarter? What you're expecting, general terms wise?
Yeah. So you mentioned this data-driven approach that I have, and I think that in today's tumultuous environment, it's very helpful to be driven by data rather than by fear or anxiety or the chaos that is happening on a daily basis, especially if you read things online or watch television. The data says that we finished 2024 on a strong note from a macroeconomic perspective. That means GDP. We were seeing good things from the consumer, which is the vast majority of it. 2/3 of economic activity comes from you and I as individual consumers, and we have several series that point to the consumer being resilient, being able and willing to spend money. So a few things that I look to on that end: retail sales are actually accelerating as of early 2025. We have disposable personal income relative to debt is in a good position, so we're not overburdened by our liabilities. The consumer side is doing well. We've got a slightly different situation on the industrial side. I think that has to be recognized, that whereas GDP and the overall economy has been growing, there's been an industrial recession that's been very mild, but certainly there in terms of 23 and 24, so 2 years of basically sideways movement, maybe slight downside in the industrial sector. As I look out towards the next couple of quarters, using tools like leading economic indicators, I am cautiously optimistic because they point to some potential improvement in the industrial sector. I use things like capacity utilization, copper prices, and the Purchasing Managers Index, which allow me to see upwards of 6, 9, 12 months into the future. And they say, basically, if we're able to contain this tumult, this chaotic period of policy reform to the early part of this year and kind of get back to business as usual in the second half of the year, whether that's by negotiating with our trading partners and getting some concessions there, or by just kind of having some more clarity, at least in terms of what the tariffs will be and how do we cope with those, then I think we should have a decent 2025. But the longer this carries on, I think the more into risk it calls this kind of more optimistic outlook.
Okay, right. So that's definitely, you said one of the things I wrote down, keep calm and carry on.
Yes,
so that's
definitely.
kind of the theme for what our audience should be doing. But you did have a lot of pointers, things to do, like you said, as far as like navigating this kind of uncertain, chaotic climate. Like, what are some the business leaders, the decision makers can do to, like you said, keep calm and carry on? Like, what are some of the things that they can do that they can control? Because there are a lot of things that are out of their control.
Certainly. So, I think you have to think about the levers that are available to you to pull in this environment. You're not going to be able to know with clarity what's going to happen, but you can control things like a focus on maintaining profitability, right? You know what your cost structures are right now. You can anticipate some of the changes that are likely to come. You know that your people will continue to cost more money because there's wage growth in the economy. And you can remember that, you're in business not just to drive revenue, but to make a profit. And so looking at your business from a profitability angle, and that means at the product line level, at the customer level, understanding which of your customers are profitable, which ones are less so, and which ones are not, and then actually taking the step of maybe walking away from the people that are costing you money to do business. That's right. Prudent. Another element is looking at operational efficiency. So productivity gains, are you doing things the best possible way? Are there some arbitrage opportunities you can gain in terms of cost savings? So shopping around for the variety of inputs that you buy into your business, whether it's electricity or trucking costs or any of the other things that you consume as a company. And then focusing on the stability in your organization from a people basis. So the job market is still stable, not as hot as it was a couple of years ago, but retention should remain a top focal point for business leaders. Yeah, and a part of retention right now is understanding what the competitive pay dynamics are. It doesn't mean that you have to be the highest paying company in your industry, but it does mean that you have to pay people a fair market wage. That requires some market intelligence, some research, and active, honest conversations with your people about, what do you need from us as a business? What can we do for you? Here are our expectations for you as an employee. This is what we need from you to be successful. If you're doing these things and modeling what potential outcomes of the future are like, we talked about a little bit the war game scenario.
The war game
right,
scenario.
Exactly. I think you can kind of forecast different types
scenarios.
of outcomes, right? And ask yourself, what will I do if A happens? What will I do if B happens? What will I do if C happens? And the important part here is being proactive with that type of strategic planning, not reactive.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right, and
so
everyone
those are
probably
things.
does that to a certain extent, but especially in this climate where it is pretty uncertain, it's probably more important than ever to have those scenarios kind of thought out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to be like treading water,
right,
not knowing what to do.
I find that the larger companies with large staffs tend to have people who are responsible for this, but for smaller and medium-sized companies, it's oftentimes the owner or the CEO that is the only person doing it all, and that can be quite overwhelming. So, don't hesitate to reach out to partners, to industry experts, to people that can provide you with the insight and the advice that will help you make those decisions in the most informed and educated way.
Okay, great. Now let's go over just some highlights of the tariffs. You said, okay, so obviously we're in kind of a holding period where they're figuring out what we're doing with Canada and Mexico. It's on pause for 30 days. It was 25% supposedly. China has gone from 10 to 20%, correct? And then the reciprocal taxes are going to be April 2nd, I believe. So whatever they do with us, we do to them. Yeah. So it's really going to be important to see what's happening mainly with Mexico and China, or Mexico and Canada.
Yes, I mean those. So our top three trading partners are Mexico, then China, then Canada, in terms of the imports that we bring in. Okay. Don't lose sight of the exports, right? Most people don't realize this, but the United States is actually the second largest exporter after China as well. Oh. And so reciprocal tariffs mean that other countries will react as well, right? So our economy, millions of people are employed in industries that are geared towards export. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to be careful of that part as well. But you mentioned a couple of the details. So the Chinese tariffs, which are now up by 20%, are stacked on top of the tariffs that already existed. So they were already in place to the tune of 25, 30% in some cases, right? Mexico and Canada, flat 25% is what we're talking about, but not oil. Oil from Canada, we get 3 million barrels a day from Canada. We are only looking to tax that at 10%, right? With the European Union, we're talking about a blanket tax of about 25%. And then these reciprocal ones, as you mentioned, the research is being conducted right now. President Trump is looking for input from all of his support staff in terms of, what should we do in each unique case, and should we impose reciprocal tariffs on countries that we trade with. And so that April 2nd deadline for the decision on that, I think, is going to be a really important thing to pay attention to. Hopefully after that, things will calm down a little
Yeah,
bit.
like you said, if that instability continues, that's a different ballgame than if you, as you think it will, you're cautiously optimistic that will get negotiated and we will be moving forward.
Even if tariffs do get put in place, the knowledge of what they are can get people some clarity in terms of what they can do to react to that. Right now, the ambiguity of not knowing is really a struggle for people, right? So my recommendation for companies would be, don't do anything brash. Don't overreact short term. So don't instigate a 10% across the board price increase. Kind of do a wait and see. And the most important part here is have open, constructive conversations with your supply chain partners, with your customers. Say, we're all going through this together. We've got to find a way to navigate this, but it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, right? It doesn't have to be like, I win, you lose. We can find a way to share the burden in case of these things happen, and still conduct good business together. So when you say keep calm and carry on, it's that kind of approach rather than throwing your hands up in the air and saying like, reacting. Exactly. Try to do as little reactionary stuff as you can right now. Be proactive, be strategic, and be, medium to long-term minded rather than short-term minded.
Okay, so I think just, the big things to watch, you mentioned keep calm and carry on, but you mentioned that you don't think inflation will ever be at 2% again. That's just when people are thinking, okay, well, we've got to get back to that, and is that realistic?
Never say never, right? Like that, I think that's a prudent thing to follow. But given the fact that wage growth is up 4% right now, given the fact that consumer price index has been rising since September instead of falling the way that the Fed wants it to. So we're now at 3%. Given all of the potential upside related to the tariff situation, it's very difficult for me to envision, even if we get to 2%, staying there for any extended period of time is hard to imagine. So my plans or my expectations right now are for inflation to be somewhere in the 3 to 5% range this year, but with a generous heaping of upside potential depending on what ends up happening in that tariff space.
Well, that was, and we really appreciate you talking with EC&M today and NETA, sponsoring the event. It's something that we'd really like the EC&M audience to continue to follow because it's so important to, be able to drill that down and, explain these really sophisticated and complicated topics. No, most people are not economists.
Sure.
Like you, it's intimidating and it's a scary subject. So breaking that down like that was really, really helpful. So we really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So that sounds like a good place to wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and we'll be back tomorrow or in other sessions for the PowerTest 25 show in Orlando. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.